Welcome. You're watching The Moody Lawyer. Justice served with experience and integrity.
Hello and welcome to The Moody Lawyer with attorney Josh Moody. With a rich background in law enforcement and a comprehensive legal career spanning criminal justice, personal injury, and civil matters, Josh offers a unique perspective on navigating the complexities of the legal system. I'm Lisa Mosby, your host, and today we're talking about wrongful death cases in California and what families need to know during one of the hardest moments of their lives. Josh, welcome. Thanks for being with me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. What does the term wrongful death actually mean under California law?
So wrongful death in California is the California Code of Civil Procedure, which is where we get most of our civil statutes. But wrongful death is classified as a death that results as the actions or negligence of somebody else. So that's where you begin. And the Code of Civil Procedure defines what negligence is and how the procedure for going about a wrongful death and what it is. And it can be, obviously, unfortunately, death is the worst personal injury, right? I mean, it's the worst injury you can suffer. Even if you break a bone, even if you're paralyzed, you're still alive. But death is the ultimate injury. So they are obviously they are the highest paid cases, rightfully so. But they're also the most heartbreaking because no matter how much money you get, your loved one is never coming back, and there's just no amount of money to recover. I mean, every single client I've ever had who's lost someone in a wrong or has recovered money in a wrongful death, even multi 7-8 figure judgments. If they could go back 5 minutes before the act and recover their loved one, they would do it. But unfortunately, that's not how life works. So the California Code of Civil Procedure lays out wrongful deaths, who can recover, how you can recover, what damages you can recover. So that's and again, most personal injuries, you're relying on medical records and that type of stuff. But with wrongful death, you don't get to hear from the deceased. You hear from their relatives and their loved ones and the people who are recovering for them and acting on their behalf.
For people trying to make sense of the process, who is legally allowed to bring a wrongful death claim in California?
It can be a little murky sometimes on who can recover. Not just anybody can recover. Typically, the first in line is the spouse. Then again, if somebody's not married, then it goes to the next of kin and the probate, and then the civil code refers to the probate code of who can recover, and it would fall in that line, the succession of who can recover. But typically, it's the spouse first, surviving children, and then if there is no spouse, there is no children, or sometimes the spouse dies with the same person, then it'd be the children. If not, then it would follow the tree. There's basically like a tree of the probate code. Then it would go to like next, parents, siblings, and then extended family. But no matter how close you are to someone, if it isn't described in the probate code, you're not going to be able to make a recovery under the civil code.
Families often feel overwhelmed trying to sort out what matters financially. What types of losses can be included in a wrongful death case?
Loss of income is a big one, especially if they're the sole provider or anything like that. That's a big one. Depending on if the act was intentional or not, you can get punitive damages. You can get your special damages. There's loss of consortium, which is loss of affection between spouses. Of course, the value, what's the value of losing a spouse? What's the value of losing a father or losing a mother? And of course, the toughest one is what's the value of losing a child? Those are very tough. Obviously, you're not going to get loss of income because of the death of a child, but the damages of the relationship of losing a child. I mean, it's just, how do you put a price tag on that? Uh, so those are some of the ways you can recover some damages under a wrongful death. I don't want to. We could talk about this a little bit more too. There's also what's called a survival action, and a lot of people miss this. I see it even in people's pleadings and in other cases, where a survival action is if the person survives for a while and then dies. Um, and a lot of times people miss that because, let's say they're suffering for however long, even if it's a matter of seconds or a matter of minutes, what's the value of being crashed into or ran over or suffering in a hospital bed, even if it's a matter of seconds, minutes, hours, days, what's the value of that? And then you can recover for their suffering during that time period. And a lot of people, especially in car accidents, because even if they die at the scene, just because they die at the scene doesn't mean they died right away. So you can still file a survival action on that and recover, uh, you know, damages for that, and that can increase the value. And I see a lot of people who miss that a lot of times, even in their pleadings. Um, so that's another way to recover additional damages.
And many families don't know where to start. What steps can help them protect their rights in the early days or weeks after a tragic loss? Can you share some advice on that?
Well, you have to get an attorney. I mean, I don't want to pressure anybody, but you have to get an attorney on a wrongful death. There's no way a person. It's just there's just no way an average person can handle a wrongful death suit on their own, because there's so many other things that an attorney can do. Not just looking at insurance policies, but looking at liability of other people, looking at liability of the roads, liability of employers. I mean, there's so many things that you got to try to find liability on other people to try to be able to recover your damages. Because a lot of times, sometimes people aren't. Nobody, the average person isn't insured for a wrongful death suit. They just aren't. Even if you have 100,000 policy or $500,000 price, it's still not enough for your average wrongful death claim. So you have to you have to get an attorney right away. But I will say too, we have ethical obligations, attorneys do, about approaching people, especially when they've been uh, the loved one has died, and approaching them about representing you. Typically, the client has to come to us, but that doesn't mean a lot of attorneys don't skirt that rule or try to skirt that rule a lot. And I've had several wrongful death cases where clients come in and they have just mountains of brochures and paperwork and boxes of attorneys trying to get them to hire them. And I don't think it works a lot of times because they're overwhelmed. They're just overwhelmed. So my advice would be, do your own research, forget all the noise, ask around, and hire somebody that you're comfortable with. But we don't do that here. We don't try to, we're not on a list that gets notified. I mean, and these things exist. Get on a list where people are notified when there's a death right away, and they're sending cards and they're sending people out to try to comfort them and trying to get them to sign with their firm. Um, and I mean, and I'm not saying, I don't want to say any, I don't want to say anything about any attorneys around here because I haven't seen them, but I've seen attorneys out of state. I mean, these are out of state attorneys, people from other states, where they will send something to people who are victims of a wrongful death, and they're just pelting them with ads. So at the very
Hmm.
beginning of a wrongful death lawsuit, it's very stressful. It only gets worse. So you have to hire somebody that you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and wrongful death cases involve evidence just like injury cases do. But what kinds of information or documentation tend to make these claims stronger from the beginning?
Wrongful death, especially with wrongful death, it's a lot more about liability, because
Mhm.
everybody's trying to pass off liability or um, deflect liability, whether it be a individual, or whether because the individual insurance company, a company, employer, and then the government, typically the roads, or somehow the government's involved. So the company will try to blame the government will try to blame the person. So liability, because when you start talking millions and millions of dollars, if they can save 10% on liability, they can save potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. So it's liability is always a lot bigger issue because of those reasons. Because you're talking, when you're talking 50-50 liability on a $10,000 case, that's chump change to the insurance company. But when you start talking millions of dollars, that 10%, that 20%, that 25% can be a big difference. And the reason why, so a lot of times, especially when you're dealing with the government or you're dealing with employers or you're dealing with large companies like Walmart, they don't just have one, and they're not just insured they don't have one insurance company. And people just don't understand this. They have multiple insurance companies. So a lot of times, I'd say this is just an example, but this is probably the average of what I've seen. Typically, a company or the government will be insured up to $1 million. That's their first level of insurance. Then they're insured from $1 million to, let's say, $3 million. That's another insurance company. Then they have another insurance company up to $5 million. Then they have another insurance company up to $10 million. And then they have what's called excess coverage. That is anything typically over 10 million or whatever amount that they pick. And that's why when you see these large cases, $100 million recovered, $200 million recovered, that's your excess carrier. And you have to work those different insurance companies because the excess carrier doesn't pay anything unless they go through the first 10 million. And I can tell just by looking at you, this is something you've probably seen for the first time. Well, the average person has no idea how that works. And it's so overwhelming. Um, so that's kind of how the wrongful death works. But then the flip side is you get somebody who causes a wrongful death and they have no money. So that's why you have to find the government, or you have to find an employer or something. In California too, another way, if it's a drunk driver, there's a statute that if they're coming from a bar and they're overserved, the bar should have known, hey, this guy shouldn't have been drinking and he was already drunk, and they keep serving him and then he leaves and drives. That's another way to recover. So those are things that you have to consider.
So many different avenues. These situations are emotionally heavy to begin with. How do you approach conversations with families who are grieving while also trying to understand the legal sides of what's happening and not wanting to make the wrong choice or the wrong decision?
It's not easy. It's just as tough dealing with a grieving family as it is, dealing with the legal side of it. But I always try to, I have some literature, I have some books that are good, that explain the grief process. Because, you go through the whole stage, anger, sorrow, and anger is a big part, and they want, everybody to pay, and that's completely understandable. But it's a big part of it's almost like there's a rite of passage process that you go through, because eventually the case will end. The case will resolve. There will be a point where the case is done and over and money will be exchanged. And then it's kind of like starting a new chapter of your life. Whether it be a spouse or a child or a sibling or, something like that. At some point you're going to have to move on. The case is over, and that's a big part. And that's a big part of the healing process as well, because at some point the case is over, and a new chapter begins for the family without the person in their lives. So I do my best in trying to understand where they're at in the process, where they're heading in the process. I try to give them as much information uh, from experts and from people who've written books and literature, and trying to go through it, just so you're not the first person, you're not alone. This is how you feel is common. It's not unheard of. And then understand where we're going to. So what the next steps would be.
How do you not rush someone? There's probably a time frame here when decisions have to be made. You have to find an attorney, there has to be discovery, and there's all these actions that need to happen. And somebody is grieving, maybe in shock, and maybe not even capable of making some of those decisions in the moment. How do you slow that progression so that they don't feel rushed or overwhelmed, but yet continue to meet the necessary deadlines? Is
Oh,
any tips
yeah.
on that?
Yeah, patience is the number. You have to be patient with the family. You have to be patient with you have to be patient with the family support system. Because even if somebody's involved in the wrongful death, they still and a lot of times do feel pressure from other family members who aren't recovering. So you just have to you have to be patient. You have to you cannot rush them. You can't even make them feel rushed. Um, but that's where I come in. I handle. I don't worry. I worry about the deadlines. The client doesn't have to. And for the most part, I mean, that's what I do. I mean, it's really no pressure for me. If you don't know what to do or not sure what to do, I'll just I can make the decisions for you and we can figure it out later down the road. A lot of times we don't think very rarely, especially in civil litigation, is there you have to make a decision, right? I mean, there's a point eventually you have to make a decision, but a lot of times today's not necessarily the day. We can do these. I will typically present my options or your options and say, this is what we can do, and eventually we'll have to make a choice, but these are the avenues we'll open up. So yeah, you have to be patient. You cannot make the family feel rushed, or the survivors, the surviving uh, uh, the what's called the survivors or the litigants feel rushed at all. So yeah, we never want to rush the family or the survivors or even the family's family. We want to give them plenty of time, and you just can't make them feel rushed. It's my job to take that pressure off of them and make them feel as comfortable as possible when making decisions. And like I said, decisions most of the time don't have to be made right away, as long as you know what the options are and you have plenty of time to think about them, and so that you're not rushed and you have all the information to make a good decision.
Thank you, Josh. And thank you to our audience for listening to today's episode of The Moody Lawyer. If your family has suffered a tragic loss or you're unsure what your options are, Josh and his team can walk you through this legal process with care and clarity. Visit moodylawyer.com to schedule a free case evaluation. And if you found this episode helpful or know someone who is struggling in this area, please share this episode with them. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.